And as I looked, the beast was killed, this is the fourth one, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. Verse 13, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him, and to him was given dominion and glory and kingdom, that all peoples, nations, language should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is one that shall not be destroyed. And then we find out that in the vision, Daniel approaches one of the ones that were standing there and asks, would you give me the interpretation of these things? So verse 17, these four great beasts are four kings who shall rise out of the earth, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. Then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was terrifying from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth and iron and claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke into pieces, and stamped with what was left with its feet, and about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell, the horn that has eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. And I looked, the horn made war with the saints, and prevailed over them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High. And the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, as for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth, and trample it down, and break it into pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and he shall put down 3 kings, etc., etc., etc. So, and then in chapter 8, we have the vision of the ram and the goat. And we find out in that vision that the ram is the kingdom of Medo-Persia, and the goat is the kingdom of Greece. And they have horns, and those horns are kings. So we got these visions. We got 4 beasts. We're told that these are kings. They're also kingdoms, and that also the horns are kings. And so there's a lot of figurative imagery. Okay, and so sometimes these beasts represent kingdoms, sometimes they represent kings, sometimes aspects of the beasts are going to represent kings and different aspects of kingdoms. Okay, and then just from both because we know that earlier, there's also the vision of the statue, which had 4 kingdoms. We know that the first one was Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar, because that's what was specifically told to us in the interpretation. Because of chapter 8, we know that the next beast, the bear, is Medo-Persia, and the king is Cyrus the Great. Because of chapter 8, we know that the leopard is Greece, and the king is Alexander the Great. And then the fourth beast, or the fourth kingdom, historically, if you track it, would be Rome. All right? And so this is all kind of laid out for us in Daniel. All right? So when we jump to Revelation chapter 13, we're going to talk about a beast, but we're going to see a lot of stuff that connects it back to the stuff that we see in Daniel. Okay? So Revelation chapter 13, and even though this is where we get a description and a lot of information about the beast, this is not the first time that the beast is mentioned in the book. That's actually in 11. And it's not going to be the last time the beast is mentioned in the book. That's going to be in 17. That's where we're going to be heading in a second. So, Revelation 13, verse 1, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea. Okay, and again, if you look back in Daniel 7, those 4 beasts were all coming out of the sea. With 10 horns. Okay, so that kind of sounds like the fourth beast. That one had 10 horns. And 7 heads, that's new, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. So that was the third beast. Its feet were like a bear's. That was the second beast. And its mouth was like a lion's mouth. That was the first beast in Daniel. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal... I got halfway through verse 2. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. If you jump to verse 5, and the beast was also given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words. It sounds like the little horn from Daniel chapter 7. And it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, and etc., etc. So we have a beast here. It's coming out of the sea, just like the beast from Daniel chapter 7. And it has descriptive characteristics that are like all four beasts from Daniel chapter 7. Okay? And so it seems to be kind of like a merging of all of these kingdoms. This idea that there's going to be these kingdoms that are going to rule over the people of God that we get from Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 8. Okay, and if we jump to chapter 17, this kind of digs in more. So chapter 17, you may have the great prostitute or Babylon or whatever. So chapter 17, just to get the intro, verse 1, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, come, I will show you the judgment on the great prostitute who is seated on many waters. Okay, so there's the waters. But if you jump down to verse 3, and he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. So she's sitting on many waters, but she's also sitting on this beast that has 7 heads and 10 horns, and is blasphemous, which these are all the characteristics from Revelation chapter 13. And if you flip over to the very end of verse 8, the ESV paragraphs it at the end of verse 8. When I saw, verse 6, I'm sorry. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. Verse 7, but the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to arise from the bottomless pit, or the abyss, which is waters, okay, and go to destruction. So, like, this is the beast from chapter 13. It has all the same characteristics. So it's not like a second beast that the woman is riding on. And if you keep going, verse 8, the beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit. So he has this kind of temporal, he was, and he's also going to come in the future, and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. Again, descriptions from 13. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are the 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. Okay, one of the names for Rome in ancient time is the city of the 7 hills, or the city of the 7 mountains. There are also 7 kings, 5 of whom who have fallen. One is, the other is not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only for a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings, who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is the Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. So, the beast, he tells us that the 7 heads of the beast represent 7 mountains. They also represent 7 kings. The beast himself is an 8th king. And then the 10 horns, those are 10 more kings. So this beast represents a lot of stuff. He seems to combine the 4 beasts of Daniel chapter 7, and then in and of himself is representative of a lot more stuff. So it's a kingdom, it's also a king, it's also a lot more kings. So it's a figurative representation that covers this whole idea of a kingdom, an authority, and people within that authority that are in opposition to the people of God. And so the idealist would look at this and say, okay, what we're looking at here is not like particularly within this beast, because he encompasses all this other thing, that we're not talking about a particular geographical kingdom or historical person, but it's more than that. And it encompasses a theme or an idea that covers the entirety of the church. That there is a world system under the control of Satan, because all this goes back to the dragon, that is part, and the ruling government, the authorities that are over the people of God are part of that, and they're always there, and they're always going to be in opposition to the people of God. And that this is not, again, we're supposed to point to a specific historic thing or a specific historic person, but it's much bigger than that, and it encompasses the entirety of the age of the church. And so that would be kind of an example of an idealist position. All right. And though I personally don't agree 100%, I do think that there is something there, and that there is, the beast of 13 is representative of all the beasts of Daniel 7, and there always is a world system that is under the control of the devil that is in opposition to the people of God. But I think we can narrow it down a little bit to some more historic events. But that's just kind of my opinion. If you would like to explore this idea more, I would encourage you to pick up the book by Dennis E. Johnson. I can give you more information about that. My copy disappeared. I loaned it to someone, and then I forget who it was. And so I can't loan you my copy. Sorry.
What's the name of the book?
The name of the book is... Does he? Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. He sounds like someone who has a lot of books. This particular book, I believe it's The Triumph of the Lamb. The Triumph of the Lamb, a commentary on Revelation. Yep, by Dennis E. Johnson. Okay, so that's idealism. There's other things in there. I do particularly like their interpretation of the 144 or the however many guys are sealed earlier, but that's a whole other discussion.
Do they address it all where in the New Testament Jesus says to submit to the authorities that have been placed over you because God has put them there?
Yep, they do.
They do?
Yep.
Do you have a brief?
No, they would say, we are to submit to those authorities, but ultimately those authorities are ungodly. And there are going to be times in which we are going to have to choose between submitting to that authority or submitting to God and then suffering the consequences of it. Yeah. Yeah. Because the authorities, the world, the way the New Testament talks about it, that is separate from the government, but the government is under the deception of the world. I mean, you can just look at our government and see that our government is under the deception of the world. Yeah. On both sides of the aisle. Hey, bud. Hey. Can I have that? Thanks. Appreciate it. High five. Bam. Okay. So, idealism. So, what's next? Preterism. Well, full disclosure, I'm a preterist, so take everything I say here with a grain of salt. Matthew chapter 24. That's kind of where this whole discussion starts.
I feel like I know that.
Huh?
I feel like I know that book.
Matthew? That's good. Yeah, I like that. Even though we talked about this when Doug and Chris and I got together, and when we were talking about Matthew 24, we made the decision just to not talk about the eschatology about it at all. Matthew 24. Because this is one of the areas where Doug, Chris, and I all have different opinions. And even different degrees to which we hold that opinion that we hold. What was it that Tom said that I'm adopting for myself? I am often wrong, but never uncertain. So. Yeah, it's good, isn't it? Yeah, I like it. Huh? Huh? It is a Bailey thing. I don't know if it was a Bailey thing or a Goodwin thing originally, but it's certainly a Bailey thing now. because it all has come together in this generation. Yeah. I think it was probably on both sides, and now I just have it double, and it's even worse. Matthew 24. So Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. If you look in Luke, they even say, like, look how wonderful all this stuff is. And then verse 2, but he answered them, you see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. And then he walks away. So one of the best Jesus mic drops in the New Testament. It's because the disciples are like, the temple is great, and Jesus is like, it's all going to get torn down. And so they get to the Mount of Olives, on verse 3, and so as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us when these things will be, and what will be the signs of your coming and of the end of the age. So they're like, hey, so when will the temple be destroyed? And in their minds, they've connected the destruction of the temple with Christ's coming and the end of the age. Because in chapter 23, when he was declaring 7 woes upon the Pharisees, he said in verse 29 of Matthew 23, in the 7th woe, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, if we have lived in the days of our fathers, we have not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. Thus you witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your fathers, you serpents, you brood of vipers. How are you to escape being sentenced to Gehenna? Therefore I sent you prophets and wise men and scribes. Some of you we will kill and crucify, and some of you will flog in your own synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Bechariah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, city that kills the prophets and stones those who sent it, how often would I have gathered your children together as hens gather her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And what is the house of Jerusalem? The temple. And so Jesus had just said, judgment is going to come upon this generation of the Pharisees, and their house was going to be made desolate, and they're not going to see him again until they say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, which I think he's quoting it ironically. And so then he says, the temple's going to get destroyed. And so the disciples are like, okay, you said the Pharisees were going to get judged. You're saying the temple is going to get destroyed. And you said that you're coming back. They're going to see you again. So how is all this going to go down? And we get the Olivet Discourse. And we get the wars and rumors of wars and the abomination of desolation and Jesus coming in the clouds and the angels collecting the elect and lightning coming in the east and all that kind of stuff and the fig tree and all this. All right? And part of where I'm heading here, so in chapter 23, Jesus said, truly, truly, I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. And he was talking about the Pharisees. And then in chapter 24, 32, from the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branches become tender and puts on its leaves, you know that summer is here. So also when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. And so we have two statements about the context of 23 and 24 being about this generation. And remember, the question that the disciples were asking is, when will the temple be destroyed? And so the temple was destroyed in 70 AD and witnessed by that generation that Jesus was speaking to. And so the preterist asks the question, if the question that the disciples were asking was about the temple being destroyed, and he said twice that that generation was going to see it, is there a reasonable historic fulfillment of the events of Matthew chapter 24 in the destruction of the temple in 70 AD? And the preterist says yes. And so what I want to do is pick two of the more outlandish things out of this and give that interpretation. And then if people want to pursue it more, they can. So I want to talk about the abomination of desolation, and I want to talk about Jesus coming in the clouds. Okay? So Matthew 24:15 talks about the abomination of desolation. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Which, again, in this context, it's the person probably reading Matthew to everybody. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas, for the woman who is pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in these days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath. For then there will be a great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. And then we have the, don't believe it if people say that Christ is coming, but everybody's going to see lightning coming from the east and shining in the west. Okay, so Jesus points out, okay, Daniel prophesied about an abomination of desolation. When you see that, it's time to go. Now, there is a connection here to that in the Old Testament. We've talked about this. This is probably a dual fulfillment prophecy, where Antiochus Epiphanes, years earlier, erected a statue of Zeus in the temple and sacrificed a pig on the altar. And so pretty much every commentator, including probably whoever said, let the reader understand in Matthew, is like, when you see something like that again, you'll know it's time to leave. Which, in the context of ancient warfare, this is the opposite of what you're supposed to do. If there's an invading army, you're supposed to go to the walled city, particularly the walled city up on a mountain that has a history of being defensible, not run away from the city. Now, when we look at the parallel passage in Luke, which is in Luke 21, Luke does not talk about the abomination of desolation, but if you go to Luke 21, verse 20, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are inside the city depart, and let not those who are out in the country enter it, for these are the days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written. Alas for women who are pregnant, for those days who are nursing infants in those days, for there will be a great distress upon the earth, and wrath against all the people, and they will fall by the edge of the sword, and led be captive among all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by Gentiles, until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. And then you have the coming of the Son of Man, and you have the lesson of the fig tree. So we're all in the same context. Luke is giving the same instructions about what to do, but he attaches the desolation to Jerusalem as a whole, and he identifies the sign as being when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies. And so there's some connection between the abomination of desolation in the holy place and the desolation of Jerusalem when it's surrounded by armies. And there seems to be a connection between the signs, and a lot of most commentators, I would say all commentators, would say that this is the same sign. But how is it connected? And this is where we're going to talk about the Roman standard. Every Roman legion had a standard, and that standard was super important because it was a representation of the gods. And it was an idol, and they worshipped it, and they made sacrifices to it. Historically, we have evidence of this both in Greco-Roman literature and in Jewish literature, where the Jews recognized the Roman standard as an idol, and we have several instances of political shenanigans about when Roman legions would come into Jerusalem because the Jews saw it as them bringing in an idol. There were even riots at a couple points because the Jews were so offended by the Roman standard being brought into the city because they recognized it as being an idol. And in 70 AD, when the Roman armies brought down the walls and destroyed the temple, they planted the standard. And so, on a preterist interpretation, the abomination of desolation that was brought into Jerusalem was the Roman imperial standard that was brought in by the armies. And so the sign is when they saw Jerusalem surrounded by armies, the Roman armies, who had the standards, who had these idols, they knew that the desolation of Jerusalem was near, and that the abomination of desolation in the holy place took place when the Romans destroyed the temple. Now, I'm going to tackle the big one. Matthew 24:29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, for they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather the elect from the four winds from one end of the heaven to the other. Okay, and so I know everybody, or many people are going to be like, there's just absolutely no way that you can say that happened at the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So, I am going to read an account from Josephus. And so if you don't know about Josephus, Josephus is probably the most prolific Jewish writer of all time. He wrote a bunch of stuff. He's one of the few Jews who actually wrote a biography at this time, which we'll talk about that more later. He wrote an autobiography about himself. And he was a governor of this particular town. It was a walled town. And so when the armies had to come in to approach Jerusalem, they needed to take out this town because you can't have a Jewish military force in an armed facility. So they took it out. And he held off the army for 3 days. And then they took him a while to find him because he was hiding in a well. And because the Roman general, it was Vespasian at the time, he was the one that started the invasion. It was his son Titus that finished it because after Nero's suicide, Vespasian went back to Rome to secure the city and declare himself emperor. He was so impressed with Josephus that he kept him on as an advisor, and it's kind of a cultural advisor. And when they laid siege to Jerusalem, which also, we'll talk about it more later maybe, they used Josephus, they sent Josephus into the city, and they tried to use Josephus as like a negotiator to get the Jews to surrender. They did not. And so Josephus was there. He saw the walls come down, and he witnessed the invasion. He witnessed a big part of the whole assault, and he writes about it in the Jewish Wars. He doesn't call it the Roman Wars. He calls it the Jewish Wars. Okay, and so this is an account that he wrote on the day that the walls fell. Besides these, he was previously talking about all of the signs that were appearing in the skies. Besides these, a few days after that feast, on the 21st day of the month Artemisius, a certain prodigious and incredible phenomena appeared. I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable were it not related by those who saw it, and were not the events that followed it of so considerable nature as to deserve such signals. For, before sunsetting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds and surrounding of cities. Moreover, at that feast, which we call Pentecost, as the priests were going by night into the inner court of the temple, as their custom was to perform their sacred ministrations, they said that, in the first place, they felt a quaking and heard a great noise, and after that they heard a sound as of a great multitude saying, "Let us remove hence." And so, Josephus, along with many other people, at the siege of Jerusalem, saw the armies in the clouds. And the priests heard in the holy place of the temple the voice of many people saying, "Let us remove hence," or "Let us take all of this away." And so I would submit to you, and the preterists would submit to you, that we do have historic evidence that Christ did come in the clouds in power and glory against Jerusalem in 70 AD. And then some people say, but it says that all the tribes of the earth will mourn and see him. That word there for earth, it's the same word that's used to translate the land of Israel and the land of everywhere else. And the ESV, I believe, correctly quotes it as tribes. It's not talking about the whole earth. It's talking about the tribes of the land, or Israel, the Jews, who were there and who saw it. And when he sends out his angels, okay, remember, what does the Greek word angel mean? Messengers. And has God sent his messengers to the four corners of the earth to find the elect? Yes. And who are the messengers that are supposed to go out into all the earth to find the elect? Us. And each other event that is described in here, I believe there is a historic connection to the events of the destruction. And that way, the question that is being asked, when will the temple be destroyed, is being answered. And what Jesus is saying is happening to that generation, like he said it would in chapter 23 and in chapter 24. And then what happens at that point in the preterist interpretation, we then take this idea and then, okay, if Matthew 24 is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, could Revelation be talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD? And they would say yes. And there's just lots and lots and lots of books and all this stuff written about that stuff. If you are interested in learning more about that, I mean, I would certainly be happy to sit down and talk about it because I'll talk about it. But R.C. Sproul wrote a book, The Last Days According to Jesus. I think that's a pretty good place to start. And then there's other stuff from there that I could recommend for you. Or you could, he cites a bunch of people that you could look at. And so that would be something that would be interesting. Now, I do want to draw a distinction here that preterists draw between full preterism and partial preterism. This label is the full preterists looked at the partial preterists and said, well, you guys aren't good enough. And then the partial preterists looked at the full preterists and said, you guys are crazy. Because the full preterist would say every bit of eschatological material in the New Testament has been fulfilled, including the rapture. Which that is not a position that most preterists take. If most people, if they say I'm a preterist, they would fall in the partial preterism. For example, myself, obviously, I don't think the rapture has occurred. I also don't think the son of perdition in 2 Thessalonians has been a thing. And I don't think that Satan has been released from the pit and done all of his stuff. So there is still some future things that are taking place. So if you may accuse me of being an eclectic at that point, but I already accept that because I have some idealistic tendencies. Okay, so questions. Yeah. No, you still have to use the mic. No, you still have to use the mic. When we got time, use the mic. It's good for you. Hold it close.
Do preterists believe in the tribulation?
Some of them.
Okay.
Trib's next. We're going to talk about tribulation next. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to take it over to Lionel. Oh, send it over to Lionel.
So you said you don't believe that Satan has been released from the pit.
Yeah.
So we're getting. He's working today.
I do. Yeah, I do. We'll talk about that.
That's the pit?
Yeah, that's all millennial stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're going to get to it. Yeah, I do think he is working from the pit. Yep, I do. Anybody? Okay. All right. Well, if nobody else has anything, we can start on the tribulation stuff. The order I go through this is terrible for YouTube videos, but I don't care. It's Sunday school. Okay, and then I'm not really going to talk much about the historicist, just because I think it has Hey, bud, can I have that? Hey, can I have it? High five. Bam. He's cool. We're cool. Because the historicist, it has to keep getting updated as you move forward to make it make sense. When it first kind of became a thing, like the beast was the Catholic Church, but then later on the beast became the rise of Islam, and then they're probably switching it to, probably American historicists are probably switching it to the gender ideology. So you got to keep updating it because you have to keep making it fit, because you have to keep extending it, because that's the way historicism works. And then again, eclectic is whatever it is you want it to be. And I'm sure you guys are all super familiar with futurist stuff. As you can imagine, you're not going to find very many dispensational preterists, as you can imagine. It just doesn't kind of fit with that system. Yeah. Okay, let's start talking tribulation stuff. All right, so before, was it 2 weeks? Yeah, it was at the beginning, before we talked about the dispensationalist and covenant reformed theology stuff. So, tribulational views. You got no trib, pre-trib, mid-trib, pre-wrath, and post-trib. Yeah, we'll get there. What's pre-wrath is the new mid-trib. You will, if you're studying eschatology, you're going to hear it because it's really big right now. Pre-wrath is really big. Rosenthal, if you're familiar with, I forget his first name. Zion's Fire, that magazine, that organization, they're pre-wrath. So it's coming back. With mid-trib is going the way of the dodo, and pre-wrath is kind of taking its place. But a good place to start here is a discussion of trib or no trib. That is the question. Because if there is no future 7-year tribulation, then all the rest of the things fall away. And what I mean here, when we talk about tribulation, specifically, it is the 7-year tribulation that starts with the Antichrist signing a treaty with Israel, breaking it 3.5 years in, and ending with the return of Christ. Only if you're pre-mill.
Oh, really? That's a whole other thing.
Yeah, we're gonna talk. We got to get through this first, and then we can talk about that.
You don't know, and you're okay with that.
Yeah, this is all third-tier stuff. This is all Tier 3 doctrine. We did the Tier 1 doctrine first. Jesus is coming back. There's gonna be 2 resurrections. He's gonna judge the living of the dead. We are going to be judged according to how did we use the grace that God gave us in this life? Did it have eternal value? And all of this comes from Daniel chapter 9. So that's where we're going. Okay? So again, so much of this is the book Daniel is like the book of Revelations of the Old Testament, although it's not the only one. Like there's a lot of apocalyptic prophecy in Ezekiel and Zechariah, and there's mentions of stuff in other books too. So, but Daniel kind of gets the big, the page time. The first portion of Daniel, chapter 9, verses 1 through 19, is a prayer of Daniel for the nation of Israel that often gets ignored in this discussion, which is a shame because it's super important for the context. So I'm going to read the beginning of it. Daniel chapter 9, verse 1. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, by descent of Mede, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, perceived in the book the number of years that according to the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet must pass before the end of the desolation of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. Okay? So Daniel is reading Jeremiah. Because in the book of Jeremiah, God tells Jeremiah, take all the prophecies that I've been giving you and write them all down in a scroll. All right? Typically, that probably would have been done after the death of the prophet, but in this case, because Jeremiah is alive at this point. Jeremiah and Daniel and Ezekiel were all contemporaries. They were all in different locations. So in Jeremiah, God said, the desolation of Jerusalem is going to be for 70 years. And then after that 70 years, I'm going to bring the captives back. Okay? All right, and the captives went into Babylon. Babylon has now been taken over by Medo-Persia and Cyrus the Great. Daniel stays in Babylon underneath Darius, who has been he is the king of the region of Babylon within the whole of the Medo-Persian Empire. So he prays, basically he's praying, God, you said you were going to bring us back if we were faithful. We haven't been faithful, please bring us back anyway. Basically is Daniel's prayer. So in verse 20, while I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my plea before the Lord my God for the holy hill of my God, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, who I had seen in the vision at the first, came to me in swift flight at the time of the evening sacrifice. He made me understand, speaking with me and saying, O Daniel, I have now come out to give you insight and understanding. At the beginning of your pleas for mercy, a word went out, and I have come to tell you, for you are greatly loved. Therefore, consider the words and understand the vision. And so this is the 70 weeks prophecy, which is one of the most famous texts within the whole scheme of eschatology. 70 weeks, or literally 70 sevens, are decreed about your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. So, bring it all to a conclusion. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem, to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then, for 62 weeks, it shall be built again, with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off, and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be a war. Desolations are decreed. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offerings, and on the wings of abomination shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. And so there's a lot of words in here that are familiar, or that come up a lot. Desolation, abominations, all of this kind of stuff. We have prophecy of the city being destroyed and the sanctuary, okay? And then we have this kind of timeline that's given to us of sevens. So we got 77s, all right? And then we have a starting point. We have 7 sevens. And then we have 62 sevens. So 7 and 62 is 69. And then we have one more 7. And so there's our 77s. And the idea of the 7-year tribulation comes from this final 7 in verse 27 of Daniel chapter 9. Okay? And so he making a strong covenant with many for 1/7, that's the Antichrist making a treaty at the beginning. And for half of the week, he shall put an end to sacrifice and offerings. And that's him breaking the treaty halfway through. Okay? Now, the idea, the discussion of between a tribulation or no trib is within all of the views that hold to a future 7-year tribulation is that this 7th 7 is disconnected from the previous 69. And the reason why they do this is because in verse 26, and after the 62 weeks, which, let me draw a picture. Pictures help. So, we have the 77s, and we have our starting point of the rebuilding. And so Daniel here says that there's going to be 7 of them, and then there's going to be 62 more after that, and that gives us a total of 69. They would say that this event right here of an anointed one will be cut off, that this is talking about the crucifixion. And then, because it talks about the destruction of the city, which takes place in 70 AD, there must be a disconnect between the 69 weeks and the 7th week, particularly because the 7th week isn't talked about again for a little while. And so that 7th week has been disconnected from the other 69. It hasn't occurred yet. And it is going to occur at some point in the future. And this 7th week, because it has these words of abomination and desolation, this must be a connection to those words being used in Matthew 24 and Revelation, where in Matthew 24 it talks about this is going to be a great tribulation like never has been and never will be again. And that's where the language of great tribulation comes from, and they attach it here. So all of the discussion that is going to be surrounding this is going to be answering some of these timeline questions. So in verse 25, where it says, "Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and rebuild Jerusalem." Okay, that's the starting point. When did that happen? What is the context of that happening? Okay, so then there's 7 weeks, and then there's going to be an anointed one and a prince. Well, who is that? What's going on there? And then there's 62 weeks, and an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. Okay, who is that? And then the people of the prince who is to come, or who are these people and who is the prince, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Almost everybody agrees that is 70 AD. But how does that event relate to these 70 weeks? And then verse 27, who is the he? Because that's a pronoun, and a lot of nouns just got talked about. So who is this pronoun pointing to? What does it mean that he's going to make a strong covenant? What does it mean that it's for half a week? What is the abomination? What are the desolations? And what is the decreed end? It's a lot of questions. And what's really funny to me about this is that's a lot of questions, and yet there's some people that are just super, super certain about the answers to those questions. You know? So what we're going to do next week is start exploring these questions. Because if you do any research, you'll know that the word to go out and restore and rebuild Jerusalem, there's going to be 3 different decrees that people are going to point to. Okay? What are the weeks? They're weeks of what? How literal are we supposed to take this? Or, in the Old Testament, where they it says that the Israelites were down in Egypt for 400 years. Well, it was actually, depending on how you read it, it could have been 380 or it could have been 430. We tend to round things. Are we allowed to do that here? Do all the events occur within the 70 weeks, or are some of them outside of the 70 weeks? And there's even some textual criticism, because there are some texts that don't have the 7 and then the 62. So there's a little bit of wiggle room in there. So these are some of the questions that we'll explore next week. Hopefully it'll only take a week, but we may end up talking about the tribulation for 2 weeks. just depending on that. And we'll see where we go. If you want a spoiler, I think that all of these events do take place within the 70 weeks, because I also connect this to Leviticus and Daniel. I think that we probably can say that these are weeks of years, but it's rounding. It's a little more on either end, but it's still within the range of biblical rounding that we see in the Old Testament. And I think that the he in verse 27 actually is Jesus. I do not think it's the Antichrist. Ironically, I think it's Jesus. We'll talk about it. Okay. Yeah, we got a little time. Here you go.
The thing that is kind of important to me, and I don't remember hearing you talk about this, but like when Jesus says, like, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place, and then in Revelation, let's see, it says like he's coming, and even those who pierced him.
Oh, yeah.
See him.
Yeah, and even in John, when he's before Caiaphas, he says, speaking to the religious leaders, you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds, a reference to Daniel chapter 7.
Yeah.
Like, you will see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then at the end of Revelation, when it says that if anyone adds to it, God will add to you the plagues described in this book.
In this book.
Right.
Right,
So
yeah.
to say it wasn't fulfilled in that generation, it just sounds too close to calling God a liar to me, that it just always really bothered me when, like, Jesus so clearly says it's happening within this generation, and then people explain it away, like, well, actually.
So the biggest, if I can jump in real quick, you can keep going afterwards. The biggest kind of explainer on that is it's not that generation, it's the generation that sees Israel restored as a nation. But if you look at a biblical generation is 30 to 40 years, and there's the number of people who were alive in 1945 when Israel became a nation is swiftly dwindling. So pretty soon they're going to have to change that interpretation, because Jesus hasn't come back yet. And unless he comes back like in the next decade, you're not going to be able to say it's the generation that saw Israel restored, because they're all going to be dead. Even from a biblical standpoint, I would say we're past that generation. A biblical generation maxes out at like 40 years. So if that is the interpretation, Jesus should have come back in the 80s. And that's why we have Jehovah's Witnesses, because they said that Jesus came back in the 80s. And part of that was because of their understanding of biblical generations. So I'll be interested to see. I mean, I would love it if Jesus came back in the next decade. It would solve a lot of my issues. But I'm skeptical, and then I'm interested to see where that whole interpretation goes. I don't think, the church is doing its job. The church in America isn't doing its job, but the church is doing its job. So they may get, the last elect person may get saved in our generation. We'll see what happens. All right, I'm going to close this in prayer. So next week we're going to dig into Daniel chapter 9, verses 24. So if you want, like, Google stuff, there's a lot of great stuff out there. We can have a wonderful conversation. I think Chris will be back, so we'll have a good conversation. Or he and I will have a good conversation. You guys can enjoy that, because he and I disagree about this stuff, and it'll be fun. So we may end up doing 2 Sundays on the Trib. We shouldn't do more than 1 Sunday on the Millennium. And then I want to talk about hell. And then if anybody has any specific topics that they would really like to talk about, let me know, because we can do that. And then after that, or if nobody brings anything, we're going to start our New Testament survey. And the plan is to do a synopsis of the Gospels. So we're going to go through all 4 Gospels at the same time, looking at parallel passages and all that kind of stuff. I do have a reliable synopsis of the Gospels. If you guys want, I can share it to you if you would like to pick it up or take a look at it. And that is going to be what I'm going to be using. And I've been studying the synoptic problem a lot lately. So I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun for me. hopefully it'll be fun for you. All right, I'm going to close this in prayer. Heavenly Father, again, this stuff it's fun. It's not super important. Father, thank you that your Son is coming back and that we do not have an eternity of sin and death as part of our experience, but you are going to put an end to the rebellion. You're going to put an end to sin. You're going to put an end to death. You're going to put an end to the pain that we cause one another, and we are going to live with you and your Son and your Spirit forever in a new heaven and a new earth, and we're going to be uncorruptible, and we're not going to be able to rebel and to hurt each other and to hurt you like we can now. And Father, I mean, it's my belief that the only reason we haven't got there yet is because you're waiting for people to be saved, and you're waiting for us to get the gospel to those people. And you don't need us. You've gotten the gospel to a lot of people without human beings, but it is your will that we participate in your plan, because it's your heart that people would be saved, and whatever's in your heart, we want in our heart. So Father, I just pray that we would be cognizant of the elect and those, we're told to give the gospel to everybody. And so that we would do that, and that would come out of a testimony of the hope that is in us and that people can see us in us. And through that, we pray that your kingdom would come and that your Son would return for his glory and in his name and for his sake. Amen.